Welcome to Tangential Soup, a weekly podcast discussing life in Australia, technology, finance, food, fitness, and the like. Hosted by myself, David Caddy, Melburnian, independent developer, and tea enthusiast, as well as my good childhood friend, Alexander Carr, Sydney Sider, karate practitioner, and lover of adventure. So, Alex, did you see the tragic news of the plane crash? The Ethiopian Airlines plane crash of just a couple of days ago?
Oh, I did. Yes, I did.
No survivors from the 157 on board?
Yes, it's always a lot more deadly, I suppose, when a plane comes down. It's very difficult to land them properly if there are problems. And the first thing I actually thought when I saw this particular bit of news was, when they go down over the sea, there are two problems. One, you can't retrieve the black box with any amount of ease, and two, there's always that element of uncertainty where, the plane's gone missing and it's probably never going to show up again. And people are, I guess, logically aware of that, but there's that kind of element for all the relatives and everything like that, where they don't actually know what's happened to, the bodies of their family members or whatever, friends, and two, there's, I guess, that lingering hope of them having landed in some remote area and survived somehow. So I suppose that it is better that they came down and all died, probably fairly instantly. And there was that immediate resolution for the family. But obviously it's still a very sad, the families and friends and everything, but it is still a very sad event, isn't it?
Yes, but the main reason why I wanted to talk about it was just the fact this Boeing 737 MAX 8, which is a newer version of the very popular 737, which has only started to come online in the last few years, I think. Do you know exactly when?
I don't know exactly when, no, but I know it's one of their newer models.
The original design, the 737, which I think the last one they did was called like the 737 Next Generation or something. So the Next Gen is now the old one, and there's a heck of a lot of those in service. But that's like a 40-year-old design or something like that, apparently. Like, it's been in the sky a long time.
Okay.
Not to say it's bad. It's been very reliable, which is one of the reasons why it's been so popular and why Boeing have released this new version. But was it a few months ago in November last year? There was another crash for Lion Airlines in Indonesia.
Yes, Indonesia. Yep.
And the reason why it went down, that they've determined now, was, I guess, through lack of training to some degree.
Well, you see, that's what I think there was a training issue, but there's also an issue with an automatic system on the plane that repeatedly dived the nose of the plane
to prevent stalling.
To prevent stalling, yes. And the pilot wasn't aware of this and kept on manually correcting it without actually turning off the system that was diving the plane or the nose of the plane.
I find this fascinating from a design perspective, because like I said, the normal 737 has been in operation for many years. It's very popular. Pilots around the world are very familiar with it.
Yes.
And one of the goals with this MAX 8, this new variation that Boeing had, was to make it as close to that one as possible, to not cause any interruption into introducing it into airlines' fleets. So, training would be very minimal and that sort of thing.
Yes.
But of course, it's not a completely unchanged aircraft. There are changes. They've put bigger engines on there to increase efficiency. And because of those changes, they actually had to bring the engines in a little bit on the wings. And because of that, it had a slight more tendency to stall on sort of takeoff. And because of that, they added this more modern anti-stall system called MCAS, which of course wasn't on the original because it didn't have those changes and it wasn't super necessary.
Yes.
And so pilots that now are so familiar with this aircraft, the old version, and the new version is so similar in so many ways purposefully, but then it's fundamentally different on this one point, that it means that, I guess, I mean, I know pilots have a hard job and they've really got to be familiar with the aircraft, but it's probably dangerous to have something so close to something that so many people are familiar with, but then make one, or there's probably a few, but in this case, a very significant change that I could understand maybe pilots panicking, in the situation it's fighting them, and they go, well, I've been in this kind of situation with this aircraft a million times before. I know what I need to do. I just need to pull it up, switch over the manual controls and pull it up. But it turns out this MCAS system isn't turned off when you go to manual controls. You have to turn it off. Like, there's another 2 switches that you need to turn off to turn it off.
Yes.
And so the pilots, I can very easily see going, well, I need to do this, and they keep doing it, and it's not working, but they never think that it could be something else because they're so familiar with the aircraft, even though it's not the same aircraft. You know what I mean?
I completely understand where you're coming from, yes. And my understanding was that Boeing didn't provide kind of training on this additional feature that had been introduced. I don't know how true that is. I think I saw it in the news somewhere that...
Well, I think they probably didn't do enough to advise the changes, because they were probably, going to the airlines and saying, look, you want this aircraft because it's so similar to the other one, right? Like, they were probably touting that as the main advantage.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But I'm sure in documents and things they passed through, they did highlight these various things. But then when it goes from Boeing to the airline and then down to training, because I don't know if Boeing necessarily does training directly with everyone around the world. I assume they pass down information that then is meant to be passed down through other trainers and things. I can imagine that getting lost, with the core messaging being that this is super similar, so you won't need to do much training.
Yes,
even if that information was there.
And it's... Yes, that is completely correct. And obviously, I think when you're training people on how to fly an aeroplane, you would think that the smallest detail would probably be of the biggest concern to you, but what you're saying is probably true. And yes, I'd say that it was just maybe overlooked. I did notice as well that Boeing were said to have issued some kind of notice or statement afterwards, which included details of how to disable the system.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if it was in the original training documents or not, but I would think that if it was, wouldn't they just say redo your training and pay specific attention to this particular part of the training documents, or yada yada?
Probably, but maybe it was mentioned and not done as well as it could have been, which is why it was easier to get lost, maybe. Like, I bet it was in there, but it wasn't really drawn attention to very well, so they probably did that other announcement to say, look, like, be really sure of this, and this is what you have to do if you're in this circumstance.
Yes.
But then clearly, well, not clearly, because we don't know if this crash is actually related or not, but if it turns out it is, clearly they haven't done that well enough in terms of broadcasting that message.
Well, obviously not, no.
It's also interesting that for the Lion Air one, the flight before the fatal flight, the same thing happened, I think, but the pilots managed to figure out what was going on and land it fine.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And Lion Air put it back into service. Now, it's possible there could have been, like this, it might also be a fault with the plane or its instruments to think it is stalling and therefore trigger this.
Well, that's what I saw. So they think that there were some sensors that were faulty, and that's what made it think that the plane was stalling, because the plane wasn't actually stalling.
Yeah.
Which was happening.
Yeah.
So it was a faulty sensor or whatever they have that kind of gives the system that information.
So there was a problem with the plane, but then it caused another system to flick on that actually caused the real damage. But the first flight, the pilots did report that and everything, and Lion Air just put it back into service when they probably shouldn't have. So they're also somewhat to blame as well.
Well, yeah, and I think that was the original kind of thought behind what happened, wasn't it? That Lion Air were just reckless and a bit careless. But at the same time, I think there are probably a lot of these calls made every day by these airlines that just decide that, you know, whatever's kind of happened in the past, it's a negligible risk and they can send the plane up regardless. And I think from what I read as well, while it is a striking coincidence, I think some professional was talking on an article or something, and he said the same thing could have happened due to any number of reasons. Like a bird could have just flown into the engine and crashed it, which does happen as well.
So it's all speculation at this point, but
it is.
Boeing's share price has taken a hit, and I can imagine if the findings do come back that this is a very similar incident caused by this MCAS system, when they have like hundreds and hundreds of these things on order, then I can imagine that probably taking even a further hit.
Well, yes, yeah, undoubtedly. The thing that I think of, though, when I see people talking about Boeing's kind of share price taking a smacking, is that who out there is going to compete with Boeing? I don't even know any other major airline manufacturers. And just to kind of get into that game and compete with Boeing, you've got to have billions of dollars just to manufacture enough planes to kind of even be a remote competitor.
This is true.
And they're so entrenched in the market that, you know, they fix this problem, everything's dandy for them, probably.
True.
Because anyone who comes in is going to have to invest so much money just to kind of build up a fleet. And then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to try and establish yourself somewhere with pilots and airlines that are just so, I guess, used to the Boeing systems that it would be very difficult to do. So are Boeing in trouble? Probably not.
Well, no, but yeah.
And they're such a huge company that what's going to happen to them, really? They get fined and they get some reputational damage.
They are. But I wonder what they're going to take away from this. Maybe they'll stop trying to push systems that try to mimic old systems and actually just make newer stuff.
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting to me that they've decided to do that, because obviously the size of the plane is the main factor, right? When you're kind of selling a 737, it's single aisle, right? So they're quite thin, smallish planes. You wouldn't use them for huge...
Yeah, so these are more for domestic flights.
Yeah, domestic travel, yeah. You know, why they decided that they needed to redo that particular model is a bit beyond me. Obviously, there's new tech to put in there, but...
Yes.
How much trouble is it to train your pilots, and who's going to compete with you in that particular space, I think, is the main question. Yes, it is. It is all very sad in the end, isn't it?
It is. Hopefully it doesn't happen again anytime soon. It seems like a lot of them have been grounded by various airlines at the moment.
Well, my understanding is that none of the US airlines, which obviously is where Boeing is based, are grounding any of their planes.
No, well, not the US ones, but most of the rest of them are. I think China Air, or one of the Chinese airlines, have got like 100 or so of the 300 and odd that are out there at the moment, and they're all grounded. So it's a pretty significant percentage that are on the ground.
Yeah. It's a big thing.
Did you see Mark Zuckerberg's blog posts?
I did. I didn't read it, but
he wants to make Facebook a bit more private.
Well, I mean, that's obviously very reactionary, isn't it? Because
very, yes.
I don't know if they're happening in Melbourne, but certainly in Sydney, I've been seeing those billboard advertisements for Facebook talking about how they value privacy, and obviously all this is coming in the wake of the Cambridge Analytica incident where Facebook information was shown to have been, was it sold or just made available to a third party? I don't...
Well, it was sort of that Cambridge Analytica built sort of an application that ran within the Facebook system to try to gather data that then they were paying people to use to enter in their data. However, then it also scraped the data of all the friends and people that they were connected to of the people that were paid. So therefore going far beyond the original reach that I guess probably the user thought in the first place would have been the case.
Mm.
And Facebook had allowed that very early on.
Yes, right, okay. Yes, data scraping. Obviously, it's kind of gone a bit more over my head than it has yours. But I know that people's information was taken in a way that people didn't agree with.
Well, yeah, it's more just, I get, like, it's hard. I don't know how much I blame Facebook 100% for that incident alone. It's just the way they architected the system meant that these apps had access not only to the data of the people that installed them, but also all their friends and anyone they were connected to.
Yeah.
Which, if you think about it for more than 5 minutes, is probably a bad idea, but clearly they never thought about it for more than 5 minutes for years and years and years. But I'm sure it was all in the terms of service, right? Like, you can argue that it's very dodgy and all that, but they probably didn't do anything against their own terms of service that everyone agreed to when they signed up for Facebook in the first place. You know what I mean?
Well, and I do, and I remember when Facebook were brought in for some kind of legal proceeding, and I think Mark Zuckerberg actually testified at that, whatever it was, and I remember the main point that was taken away from that, and obviously no charges that were laid were stuck because, he said it was all perfectly legal and everything. It was just the public, I guess, backlash that they had to deal with mainly.
Yeah, it's a very bad look, but it's not illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably only because Facebook is as big as it is, and it's been around long enough and has so many users that there's so much sensitive data on the platform that really they got in trouble for this. You can imagine a smaller player probably granting even more access to various people and their data, and no one really caring or raising an eyebrow.
Yes.
But as it is, it was probably a bad move, and they've tightened that up. And there was a few other things, wasn't there? But I can't remember exactly what all of them were.
There was something that emerged afterwards, but it was along a similar vein. And basically the upshot is, Facebook have been kind of making a huge push to I guess, calm people and try and reassure them that
repair their image.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that they are safe on Facebook, which I think you probably have pointed out that they're not really safe on Facebook anyway, regardless of whether they make these changes.
No, well, I find it a bit funny that people are in uproar and they kind of expect more from Facebook, and not to say I told you so, but from the very beginning, I realized that whatever you put on there, and it's true of basically any social media, you don't want to put anything sensitive on there because it's never really private. It is to a certain degree, and I definitely think these platforms should be doing more in that regard. But if you're silly enough to put your whole life on there, I'm sorry, it's just, I think you're putting far too much trust in these big organizations.
And that's true, yes. I suppose I've somewhat been guilty of it, but I suppose I've more just shared moments in my life than anything necessarily that personal. Because, there have been stories about how Facebook knows a lot about you, and I think I saw something about Facebook even knowing when women are having their periods and things like that. So, just, I don't know how exactly they get that information, but probably through the information that's shared.
I think maybe the thing you were referring to is there's a whole bunch of apps out there and websites and things that use an analytics product that is provided by Facebook.
Yeah.
So the analytics provide developers valuable information in the way that these apps are being used by the user base in order to create a better product and also get diagnostic information if things are crashing and all of that. However, the trade-off to using a pre-rolled system that Facebook, like the one Facebook provides, is often that you have to grant them access to any information that you acquire from your users, they also get to see, right?
Mm-hmm.
And recently, which is why I think you're thinking of this, I think a few security researchers looked at a whole bunch of apps and discovered that they were using these frameworks and discovered the types of things that they were pushing back to the analytics package, which means that Facebook would totally also have all this data, including period tracking apps and things of that nature.
Right. Okay. Yes.
And, it's like as soon as the user enters that information, bam, it's up to the cloud and it's in Facebook servers. But it's both a Facebook problem, but it's also a developer problem. Like, there's two things wrong with that scenario. One, the developer trusting Facebook analytics in the first place, which
Yes.
I wouldn't, especially when there's so many other analytics packages out there. Plus, to roll your own basic stuff wouldn't really be that hard.
Mm-hmm.
But two, like, why do you actually need to store user data in the analytics package? Like, you could just record that the user did a specific action, or they were on a specific page, or there was a crash here. You know what I mean? You can sort of record interactions, even though that's slightly personal, but it's not too bad.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't really matter if Facebook had that, as opposed to the specific data that the user is entering. I think they're crossing the line there.
Oh, okay. All right. Yes, that was more detailed.
Sorry.
No, that's good. That's what we're here for, to learn. So the basic upshot of this is don't trust Facebook, which is where I guess we're to now, where Facebook is trying to tell us everything's more secure, and I believe there's going to be encrypted message services as well.
He wants all Facebook's messaging products, which includes both Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, which they purchased a while ago, and also Instagram, whatever they call their chat thing in that, which they also bought a little while ago, to have end-to-end encryption, which is essentially means that Facebook can't read your messages. Only you and the recipient can view the messages. And he also said you can have it set to automatically delete messages, somewhat akin to Snapchat, as opposed to things just being recorded forever.
So I guess my question here is, as someone who doesn't really understand, I mean, I understand the idea behind encryption, right? Which is what you've just said. The messages are secure, only you and the person you're communicating with, or people you're communicating with, can actually view those messages. But they're on Facebook. Like, how is it that they're not able to see what we're talking about?
It's pretty cool technology, actually. It's hard for me to probably explain it in a coherent way, but essentially, whatever client you're on will generate a key, or sort of two keys. It's like a pair of keys. It's like a private key and a public key, and then the public key is sort of sent across the wire to the other recipient, and they also have their private key. And it's this clever math that means that you can only sort of decrypt the messages if you have both the public key and the private key, whichever private key it happens to be. And sort of the clients can share the private keys indirectly in such a way that if you intercepted it in the middle, you would only have like half the information and you wouldn't be able to figure out what the rest of it was. It's a very clever algorithm, but it just means that only the clients have the full information to unlock the data. And so the go-between, which would be the Facebook servers, only see the sort of the raw encrypted bits.
Right. Okay.
Which, if you put the full power of the world's computing on it, you could probably unlock something in a little while, but that, it's impractical to do. So for all intents and purposes, it is a very secure means of transferring data.
Yeah, okay.
It's a very hand-wavy overview, but unless they build a backdoor into it, it should be very secure.
Okay. And this is technology. Well, it sounds like it's technology that you trust.
It's just mathematics, really. And you can't really break numbers. You can brute force things, but we don't have the computing power to do that. When you go to a certain level of encryption, right?
Yeah.
You can encrypt something very basic, even though it's not necessarily encryption. You could say every letter of the alphabet corresponds to a number shifted by 5 or something like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's sort of more obfuscating than encryption, but that type of thing. But then you take that to 128 bits of encryption, which means there's so many permutations that you can't guess it. And to try every combination over and over and over and over and over and over, you would get there, but we're talking like decades.
Right, okay.
For like supercomputers. So if you were trying to do it on your own computer at home, you're talking like the heat death of the universe or something.
So, and they don't use the same encryption system? I don't...
Well, like I said, because there's so many permutations.
Okay, so I know what you were talking about when you said like transfer the numbers or just swap a number for a letter. Sorry, swap a letter for a number. Does the same kind of system exist across all the encrypted data, like between my messages and your messages and John Smith's messages and Susan Jones' messages?
Yes. So there's actually a few different encryption technologies, but there are a couple of standard ones that most people use because the algorithms have just been ironed out to this point that they're rock solid.
Right, okay.
So it's just easier to use those. But the difference is, like, the jumble is different, right? Although the system is the same, the jumble is different. And the key tells you how it's been jumbled.
Right, okay. So the key is the jumble.
And you can't guess that key. Like I said, it's basically impossible.
Right.
Unless you a billion or probably more like 1 trillion to 1 guess, you got it. But hey, that's like one message out of a whole correspondence because they use different keys like all the time, right?
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to know.
Well, it actually depends. You can have it like per session or you can have it per message. The very secure ones are like literally per message. It's a different key sort of transaction backwards and forwards all the time.
Right. Okay.
So even if you intercept it, you'll only get it either for one message or maybe a very short window of time.
Yeah.
Well,
that's good, I suppose. I mean, I guess it doesn't stop the old thing of someone breaking into your phone and reading your messages, though, does it?
Oh no, they have physical access to your device. The game's over.
Yeah.
But there's so many ways that the game is over that doesn't really matter. The more interesting thing here is that Facebook won't be able to see inside your messages.
Okay.
Assuming that they do what Zuckerberg is claiming that they're going to do, both in actually building it and building it in such a way that there isn't a backdoor.
Now, my understanding is that a backdoor, I mean, obviously, when it comes to backdoors, kind of a famous case that recently came up was the US, or the FBI, I think, or one of the US government bodies trying to get Apple to build a backdoor into their, is it their phone security system or something?
Pretty
like
sure
that?
it was like iMessage.
Yeah. And obviously Apple refused, and I assume that Facebook are not going to be building one into theirs. You seem to think that it'd be fairly worthless if it had a backdoor, right?
Well, it depends on what your objective is. In terms of Facebook trying to repair their image and saying we're super private, I would say that would be pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
But if you build a backdoor into something, you might be doing it to comply with government regulations, right?
Yeah.
But then also make it harder for nefarious third parties to hack into the system.
Yep.
So you could possibly do it in such a way that it has some benefit, because one of the things that has been mentioned with this post is that Zuckerberg's always mentioned that he wants to be one of the rare US success stories in China. But the Chinese government mandates that they have to be able to view all data on all these platforms at any given time, or else you just can't operate there. So maybe that would be one reason to do it. But yes, in terms of repairing their image, I don't think it would be a good idea. But Apple took a very strong stance because they have no real ulterior motive to view inside your image, inside your messages.
Yeah.
Whereas Facebook are trying to sell you ads. or trying to sell ads to you that are targeted to you.
Yeah.
So there is actually a benefit in them having access to that information, which is why it makes me skeptical that they'll enable this in the first place. Forget about the backdoor. I just don't think they're even going to do this. But if they do, it'll be interesting.
Okay. Well, maybe they will. Maybe they won't. Probably be better for them if they did, though, right?
Publicity-wise, it would sure give them a shot in the arm.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go to the final one then. AFL's failed interchange boards.
I just found this so funny. So for this season of the AFL, the Australian Football League, great game. If you don't know what it is, you should look it up. Have recently made a whole bunch of rule changes, and included in those rules to stop runners being on the ground when play is actually happening. So runners are people that come off from the boundary to share messages and various things with the players to try to communicate coach messages, basically, to the team. And so now they're much more limited than they were before. Basically, in seasons past, they could be running around all over the place. As long as they didn't directly interfere with the play, they were fine. And if they did, they gave away a free kick, but they could be on the ground basically the whole time. But now, because of these rule changes, clubs are trying to find other ways to send messages to the players while play is happening. So in this example here, they were trying to find a way to basically just sub players on and off, right? So it's somewhat akin to in soccer how they hold up a ball with the number to come on and the number to come off.
Yep.
Basically the same thing here, but the AFL put $45,000 to some company, I guess, to build this like electronic version of these boards. So $3,000 each for 18 clubs, and they were all trialed a couple of weeks ago in the first practice match series, and 15 of the 18 clubs gave them straight back. 2 didn't get around to using them. 1 was said, oh, there's some potential here, but essentially this is just a failed experiment because the glare in the bright sunlight, these digital screens just couldn't be read from across the field, which you would think would be like the number one priority when you're building something like this, but clearly not.
I find it very odd. Another thing I noticed from the picture, because there is a picture supplied, it's not a very big board.
No, it's not. But there's a rules around that too.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why necessarily. I suppose if you go too big, you start obscuring people's view on the boundary, maybe.
Yes.
But anyway, the AFL made an arbitrary rule that it could only be so big. So I guess they worked with that.
Yeah. It's just it seems very peculiar that they would do this. $3,000 is quite a lot of money as well for a board. I don't know how they get text onto that board. Is it supplied by the coach? And then
well, they have computers on the boundary to like review plays and various things. So I imagine there's just some mechanism that they type something into there and it probably wirelessly goes across to the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right, okay.
Which is possibly easier than the analog systems many of them are now switching to, which is just sticking the numbers on the board. So it might have saved a few seconds, but if it can't be seen, then there's no point.
I mean, there is screen technology that exists that you don't have to worry about a glare with. I think I have that technology on my Kindle.
That's true. They could have used e-ink. That would have been a good idea.
It seems very strange that they haven't.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't know who was building these things, but clearly it was some firm, probably in Australia, that was, hired in. Like, these weren't necessarily designed to be the things that they would use forever. It was sort of like the initial version, like to try to test it out. But if you're given this brief, I don't know how you could not have that like the number one priority, like visibility, right? Like, I don't know what they were prioritizing. Let's get the information onto the board, then worry about reading it. Yes. I would have kind of done it the other way around, but anyway. You're right. It's crazy they didn't think of that and try to pick technologies for that purpose.
Yes. But there you go. And I think, I don't know, when I see something like this happen, I'm always reminded that like someone has picked this company to do this, and this company has presumably supplied whoever was picking this company with a pitch of some sort. And, you know, like it's not necessarily entirely the company's fault. The person who was picking the product or the company to supply the product probably should have, you know, realized that the product wasn't going to work very well.
This is very true.
Plus, that's $3,000 for a board. I mean, that's not very cheap. You could just get a screen and stick it in a holder, and then you'd have the same result, right?
True, except, you know, they did have to prototype the thing and then make the components. Like, that's not a massive, crazy budget. But you're right, the person in charge of this project might have just said, can you build us some digital boards that can display information? And the company went and did that without any sort of guidelines around visibility.
Yes.
But someone's at fault here.
Yes, no, somebody is. Fortunately, it's always the way.
Thanks again for joining me, Alex.
Not a problem, David. Pleasure as always.
You can follow and get in touch with us on Twitter at Tangential Soup, and you can find this week's show notes for more information about today's topics at tsp.fm/205. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider sharing it with anyone you think might also, and we'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
Ciao.